Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, July the 23rd, 2021. I'm going to begin today by speaking about Hungary, which is the country that proves the rule that any government which is patriotic will be hated, detested by the globalist elite. There has been an unofficial war being waged against Hungary for several years, and whether it's going to become a real war, perhaps the EU army will be put to its test. Let's go to a story from Bloomberg by Flavia Kraus-Jackson and Zoltán Simon. It's called How Alphabet People Rights Forced Hungary into a Moment of Reckoning. It started with a book of kids' fairy tales and is culminating in a defining test of a nation's democracy and even its future in the European Union. Hungary's weaponization of gay rights, these people don't know how to write English, but never mind that, has led to a showdown rarely seen between the bloc and a member state. Brussels is threatening action over an alphabet people law that could involve cutting funds to Budapest. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán proposed to put what he calls the protection of children against homosexual content to a referendum. When the pressure on our homeland is so great, then only the will of the people is able to defend Hungary, Orbán said in a Facebook post on July the 21st, 3 days before Budapest hosts what organizers expect to be its biggest ever Pride March and perhaps its bravest. The reality is that the EU has finally come to the realization that it has an antagonist it needs to take on. Over the past 7 years alone, Orbán has teased out the loopholes to get Hungary a net 25 billion euros of European money. All the while, he has been openly defying EU values, even more brazenly than the cover of a pandemic. Oh, I see. The EU doesn't have laws and regulations. It has values. That's good to know. Orbán cemented his control over the media, the judiciary, and education, triggering condemnation in European capitals, but little action. This week, Hungary was identified as the only European country that used Pegasus spyware to keep an eye on critics of the government. Of course, the other EU countries do not surveil journalists. No, of course they don't. The targeting of alphabet people rights became even more overt in October last year with attacks on an anthology called Fairyland is for Everyone. Stories include a prince who ends up growing his blonde hair long and trying on dresses, a gender non-conforming deer, and a gay Roma boy. Sounds delish. The book snowballed into its own unwitting David and Goliath story. David and Goliath, we'll get back to that shortly. Pitting the alphabet people community against an increasingly authoritarian leader. Rather than collateral damage in Eastern Europe's populist shift of recent years, it turned into a lightning rod for resistance after becoming a word-of-mouth hit and selling 30,000 copies in Hungary. Thank you to authors for that mixed metaphor car crash. Yet it took on new meaning when Parliament voted in June to ban minors being exposed to any kind of portrayal of homosexuality or sex reassignment, a tipping point for the EU. It's turned into a symbol for people who are fed up with the government, said one of the publishers, Dorothea Redai, 48. We expected some public reaction, but at the volume it came, we were surprised. We were accused of corrupting children. Golly, I wonder why. The ban on depictions of homosexuality to minors was packed in an anti-child abuse law, a move that critics say, weasel words, equated being gay with pedophilia and would therefore prey on a parent's worst fears. Stories that don't prominently label books as having non-traditional content face a fine. Teachers cannot introduce them at their schools. The issue is that kids can be so easily influenced, said Leonard Borbeli, mayor of Csaspel, a working-class district of Budapest. He's one of several municipal leaders from Orbán's Fidesz party who banned the book in kindergartens. When a beautiful princess is brought in front of a prince for marriage and instead he likes her brother, or when a boy is urged to wear a girl's clothes and not to be ashamed of it, then that's when I say this has no place, says Borbely, a father of 3 girls. Radai says that message has become pervasive in a country that used to be a relatively sanguine place for the gay community compared to other parts of the former Eastern Bloc. Interviews with several mothers in Hungary suggest she's right. Nora Kirali, founder of the Association for Young Families, says she has no problem with gay people. She just doesn't want their way of life to get airing in public. A mother of 5, she supports the government's line. If happy same-sex couples are visible everywhere all the time, then that's going to be what kids wish for, said Kirali. We shouldn't pretend that something is natural what isn't natural. Other parents are more conflicted. Yulia Majdikpota agonizes about what to tell her 1-year-old son. A few years back, I would not have thought I would have to whisper in secret that homosexuality exists. This is obviously made up. We're supposed to believe that this woman is having conversations about sexuality with her 1-year-old son. I naively thought we had progressed over time, that society would become more and more accepting, but now it seems they have let the genie out of the bottle, she said. It's hard for me to understand how we got here in the 21st century. Indeed, it perhaps wasn't meant to be this way in Hungary, certainly compared with staunchly Catholic Poland, whose leadership is also targeting alphabet people as enemies of the state. When he won a first stint in power in 1998, the youthful Orbán was a poster child of Eastern Europe's push to integrate with its Western neighbors. It joined the EU 6 years later, along with 7 other former communist states. The erosion of alphabet people rights mirror Orbán's transformation into ringleader for Europe's populists. Boo! Harnessing the resentment toward liberal elites and immigration that has also worked so well for Donald Trump and Britain's Brexit campaigners. Orbán is playing on this feeling, playing with the deepest fears, Radai said. A country with an autocratic leader works by creating enemies. They incite hatred against different vulnerable groups of people, the Jews, the Roma, the refugees, and now alphabet people. Over time, the 58-year-old Hungarian leader simultaneously limited the hard-earned freedoms that came with the lifting of the Iron Curtain. The coronavirus crisis allowed Orbán to act with even greater impunity as he declared a state of emergency to rule by decree. A law banning legal gender recognition for transgender people was passed during the first lockdown. Government officials have a huge responsibility when it comes to resisting or whipping up emotions, especially with all the pent-up angst and frustration from the pandemic, said Vera Messing, researcher at the Center for Social Sciences in Budapest. That's why it's really dangerous to mix pedophilia and homosexuality, because then you get the frightening scenes where homophobes suddenly feel empowered to act on their impulse. On July the 24th, Budapest holds Gay Pride in what its director, Adam Szyszkos, describes as a revolutionary atmosphere. It will be an important bellwether of solidarity. Back in 2007, marchers were violently assaulted by extremists, but since then, the festival, the oldest and biggest of its kind in Central Europe, has only grown. It could turn into a pivotal weekend less than a year before Orbán will seek a 4th straight term in the 2022 elections. After more than a decade of pushing an anti-EU narrative, the bloc is more popular than ever, and losing membership and freedom to travel and work within its borders would be unthinkable for many Hungarians. So far, Orbán has succeeded in pushing the EU's buttons, but also knowing when to dial back. Brussels, for its part, is trying to break the cycle of being a dog with lots of bark but no bite. What was this translated from Hungarian? At the EU summit in June, leader upon leader rounded on Orbán. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte straight up said, Hungary has no business being in the European Union anymore. Others were more personal. Luxembourg's Xavier Bettel, who is gay, put it directly to Orbán. I didn't get up one morning after having seen an advert on the TV of some brand. That's not how life works. It's in me. I didn't choose it. Orban, for now, is digging in. His referendum plan makes it less likely that billions of euros of EU pandemic funding will be released quickly. European leaders will also be watching how this weekend's Pride March plays out. For Radai, the question is how to turn back. The reality is that the government's slogan, "We are protecting children," is working. Child protection gets the attention of a lot of parents. So what the EU is saying that, with regards to COVID, we're going to delay money so that people hungry die because children are not being propagandized with alphabet people propaganda. How about that? Oh, and let's look at this. Let's look at Xavier Bettel. I didn't get up one morning after having seen an advert on the TV of some brand. This is not how life works. It's in me. I didn't choose it. How about Elliot Page? Because when she came out as lesbian, we were informed that this is immutable. There's always a lesbian. And then, this year, she decides that she's not a lesbian. She's a man, and she has always been a man. And what does gender nonconforming or gender liquid or any of these other phrases mean, except that sexuality is it's a spectrum, and nobody is really here. They could be here, they could be here. It could change from day to day. So we are told at the same time that one's sexuality is immutable, but at the same time that it is completely fluid. Well, pick one. Let's talk about David and Goliath. So on the one hand, you have the EU, George Soros, and Big Gay. And on the other hand, you have the Prime Minister and leader of a party in a small Central European country, Viktor Orban. It's fairly obvious that Orban is the David here, and the EU plus Soros plus Big Gay is Goliath. But these people always like to pretend that they're underdogs, even, as in my country, when they order politicians to march in pride marches, when they order politicians to agree with, to applaud the sexual mutilation of children and order them to pass a law that even sending, say, a 10-year-old girl who suddenly wakes up one day and decides that she is a boy, that sending her to a counselor would be against the law. And such counselor or psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever could be sent to prison as a result. This does not sound like underdog to me. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, pray. Pray for Viktor Orban. That's my message on that. In more alphabet people news, this is from Alex Boutillier of the Toronto Star. Erin O'Toole's second most senior staffer is personally involved with helping social conservative candidates secure party nominations. 4 conservative sources told the Star that Steve Outhouse, a longtime conservative operative and deputy chief of staff in O'Toole's office, is moonlighting as a consultant on multiple nomination campaigns across the country. The majority of the 9 candidates who have contracted Outhouse's firm, Interseed Communication, come from the social conservative faction of the party. Outhouse simultaneously working to get social conservatives nominated while occupying one of the most senior roles in O'Toole's office is raising eyebrows in conservative circles. Quote, "It definitely raises a ton of red flags and questions," says Jamie Ellerton, principal at consulting firm Canaptus Limited and a longtime conservative activist. Although it's not uncommon for the party leadership to have preferred candidates in nomination races, it's quite another to have someone drawing a taxpayer salary to be making bank on the side to engage in such a transparently conflict of interest in tipping the scales of nomination races to their own financial benefits. What should we make of that? Jamie Ellerton is a PR spiv with his own PR spiv company. And does he declare his list of clients? Because before I hear any opinion from Jamie Ellerton or any other PR spiv, I want their list of clients. For someone in the PR business to complain about conflict of interest is absolutely hilarious. Never mind the fact that the Canadian media is now let's find some PR spiv to comment on this, as if there was no one else available. And what do we know about Jamie Ellerton? Well, we know that he is a homosexual activist, and he is a very prominent member of the gay cabal, which has just about completed its takeover of the Conservative Party of Canada and the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. But for some reason, Alex Boutillier doesn't mention this in his column. I asked him about this, and I don't think that I've got a response from him, and I'm not expecting to get a response from him, because this kind of suppressio veri has just become the norm in the Canadian media. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Oscar Toe and Dan, Tricky Who, Don from Beyond, Podcast 88, John S., Eche Lux. Did you see a sign that said Dead Sweetie Storage? I don't know what that's in reference to. Hello to Don from Beyond. Kevin, I hope today that you will talk about the federal lawsuit filed by America's frontline doctors. I'm afraid I haven't heard of that. Just let me make a quick search here. Frontline doctors, terrible typist, lawsuit. Okay, here we go. This is from Paul Craig Roberts. America's frontline doctors file federal lawsuit to curtail emergency use of COVID vaccines. Okay, I will get to that in the segment where I talk about COVID-19. Okay, hello to Chad Chadson, and thank you to our valiant moderator for his work. Hello to Gamion. A gender non-conforming deer. Now we're talking, says Oscar Toe. Yes, indeed, gender non-conforming. Steve says progress is overrated. Popcast 88 says, I want to make Kevin saying boo or boo. It's the shift there. It's the crack in it, which I think makes it work. Okay. Metal Mike says Hungary and Poland need to pull out of the EU. If they do not, their countries will be destroyed within 25 years. Gender liquid. Yeah, I can't claim a joke. I can't claim credit for that joke. It was something that Stephen Root's character said on Barry. He was shown a picture of Barry and said, "This is a man." And he said, "I don't know. Looks pretty," I can't say it without laughing. It looks pretty gender liquid to me. Let's see. Popcast 88 says Xavier saw a nude picture of Lena Dunham and said, "I'm out." A visionary companion says in most cases they are neither born that way nor they choose to be what they have become. They were made that way by various factors. I remember interviewing once for a story this fellow, he's now dead, called John Nicolosi, who ran one of these dreaded conversion clinics in California. And he told me that in his experience, based on his talks with the patients at his clinic, 40 to 60% of them said that they had been sexually molested as children. Hello to John S. Journalist Brian Lilly is dating Doug Ford's press secretary, says Metal Mike. His articles reflect this nicely. Why is the Toronto Sun tolerating this conflict of interest? Well, I don't know. I mean, that seems to be de rigueur. I mean, if you read Tom Bauer's book about Boris Johnson, which I'm going to be talking about at 5:30 Pacific, the journalists all seem to be shagging politicians or civil servants. Okay. And hello to Martin M. I don't know that I can pronounce your last name because this is very small font that I don't know whether I can adjust the size of the font in the chat to the right. If someone knows whether I can increase the size, I would greatly appreciate it. Texas Feral Hog says constantly shifting contradictory principles and positions is a red flag that demonstrated you're dealing with a Marxist ideology interested in usurping raw power only. It's Polish. Yes, I understand. I'm trying to think of the name of not Norman Stone, Norman Davis. One of his books about the war between the Soviet Union and Poland, 1919 to 1920, he said that Polish is very easy to pronounce. And then I read that book by Dagmara Dominczyk, where she says Poland is actually very difficult to pronounce. So I think you have to increase the size of the whole browser's text to, well, I've already done that. I mean, this isn't, I have it up to 150%. But it is not, it is very small. Let's put it that way. Very, very small. And let's talk more about the media. Oh, no, let's talk about Jagmeet Singh. In the last election, well, let's go back further than that. When Jagmeet Singh was elected leader of the NDP, the media swooned, absolutely swooned. This charismatic Sikh man with such a story, such a tremendous story. Canada is going to fall in love with him. And I predicted at the time that Canada would not fall in love with him, not because he is a Sikh, but for various reasons. He is a radical supporter of Khalistan, the would-be a Sikh republic in India. He's banned from India as a result. When he was in the Ontario legislature, he got them to pass a motion condemning India for its genocide in the Punjab. And perhaps more to the point, Jagmeet Singh looks, oh yes, apart from Canada's racist, Canada is ever so racist. Why are you here then, buddy? Why are you here? He looks like a cartoon villain because he wears these lurid turbans, and of course he has the long beard, another one of the 7Ks, and his teeth are always bared. As I say, he looks like a cartoon villain. But no, Canada's going to fall in love with him. They are. But what happened? Happened in the last election to the NDP party that he had inherited. He got stomped. They had 39 seats before, and they were reduced to 24. That's how much Canada fell in love with Jagmeet Singh. But here's a piece. Well, it's a love letter, really, from Lisa Van Dusen in the Ottawa Citizen. And judging by her name and the profession she's in, I'm obviously related to her. It's called Jagmeet Singh and the Importance of Being Authentic. When we last left our federal election speculation Google alert menu, the original round of soothsaying and odds-making that provided such a dreamy early summer beach blanket bingo diversion. Oh, God, just stop. Just stop. From Delta variant anxiety and vaccine misinformation was in full swing. But because we live in an era of tactical log rolling, ruled by Newton's third law of bullshit, this woman is just the worst, whereby every political narrative produces an opposite political narrative designed to recalibrate the first political narrative based on the relative operational value of outcomes That original pre-election speculation has now been qualified by a barrage of deterrence, much of it generated by parties with a vested interest in election timing, some of it not even. Can anyone make any sense out of that paragraph? Still, since for the Prime Minister in charge of making the call, the price of waiting includes a potential fourth wave-induced reversal in the government's pandemic management epic, as well as the possibility of a change in the campaign dance card if Erin O'Toole succumbs to the sort of enticingly incentivized Kremlin flu that could rationalize a late substitution. Let's assume away. Is someone paying for this to be printed in the Ottawa Citizen? You know, I know that political writing in my country is bad, but this is one of the worst I've ever seen. One factor that must be keeping Justin Trudeau up on the nights when O'Toole isn't helping him sleep is the appeal of NDP leader Jagmeet Singh. Singh is everything Trudeau is not, in an interesting way, the way O'Toole is everything Trudeau is not, in an uninteresting way. A lawyer who transmuted the pain of a difficult childhood with an alcoholic father and a sexually abusive martial arts teacher into a career as a public defender. Singh is the great-grandson of Punjabi Sikh freedom fighter and Indian independence activist Sawat Singh Thrikwala. The Prime Minister famously boxes. Singh practices Brazilian jiu-jitsu. In 2017, experts surveyed by Vice on who'd win a Justin Jagmeet smackdown picked Trudeau, but the methodology is so impenetrably bro-ish that I have no way of judging those results. Trudeau has been teased about his hair. Singh offers YouTube videos on how to tie a dumala. Trudeau has been cited running with international counterparts. Singh, for the cover photo on his 2019 autobiography, Love and Courage, rides a bike. It was stolen from his condo garage in March and in an outrageously Canadian moment returned to him by Ottawa police within hours. First of all, why do we need to know that Jagmeet Singh was sexually abused by his martial arts teacher as a boy? Is this a bid for sympathy, for him to trot out his shame in this regard? Oh, I had an alcoholic father. Yes, many can say the same. Again, why do we need to know? Secondly, instead of befouling the columns of the Ottawa Citizen, why doesn't Lisa Van Dusen simply ask him out on a date? I mean, there are some exceptions, but as a rule, female journalists tend to favor and favor very strongly whatever politicians they would like to have sex with. I know it's sad, but it is true. And how does she wrap this up? One can argue that Singh, as a leader of a party unlikely to be conferred the responsibility of governing, can afford to be authentic and sincere these days at a time when the stakes of competence are so high and the cost of electing phonies so exorbitant. No politician can afford to be anything but authentic and sincere. With so many lies still being told in the public sphere, truth is more than its own reward. This woman is an idiot, apart from being a terrible writer. No politician, no person can afford to be totally authentic and sincere, if for no other reason, for fear of hurting other people's feelings. But no, Jagmeet Singh is the man who broke the mold. Yes, I guess being totally authentic and sincere is why a man who was previously known as Jimmy Dhaliwal decided a few years ago that that wasn't sufficiently Sikh enough, so he'd have to become Jagmeet Singh. Also, a memo goes out to these people. Maybe it's not an actual memo, but they hear the tom-tom drums. That, it's time to be boosting Jagmeet Singh because now Canada's finally fallen in love with this man. And here from iPolitics is Andrew Perez, described as a Toronto-based communications and public affairs professional, another PR spiv. Converging national global events are feeding Singh's momentum. As Canadians awake to the realities of a late summer election, much has been written about the NDP's surging electoral prospects under the leadership of Jagmeet Singh. A recent Abacus Data public opinion poll suggests Singh is the most popular national political leader with robust support among women, younger voters, and British Columbians. Now, why might that be? Something to do with something that happened in Minneapolis last year, amazingly enough. The second global development to lift Singh's electoral prospects has been the relatively new public discourse about the need to stamp out systemic racism in the United States and Canada. Well, that's kind of a problem there. Define systemic racism. And what exactly do you mean by stamping it out? How many people will need to be stamped out for this to happen? In May 2020, George Floyd, a black man, really? He was black? Well, thank you for that. I had no idea. Was killed by a white police officer in Minneapolis. Floyd's murder triggered an outpouring of anger, protest, and public support from racialized and non-racialized communities alike throughout the United States, as well as in major Canadian cities like Toronto and Vancouver, traditional bastions of NDP support. Singh reacted to the Black Lives Matter movement swiftly and fervently, challenging Trudeau to use his position of power to go beyond pretty words and pretty speeches and do something. He also implored the Liberal government to commit to ending racial profiling and address the over-incarceration of Black people in Canada. Singh then championed a motion in the House of Commons to recognize the existence of systemic racism in the RCMP after several Indigenous people had died at the hands of the force's officers in early 2020. George Floyd was not Canadian. He did not die in Canada. Canada never had slavery. Black Lives Matter is an ugly and irrelevant American import. The same sort of people who are always complaining about American influence in Canada, American domination of Canada, are the very first to demand that some stupid and poisonous American trend be adopted in Canada. And I just, to have a Sikh and a militant Sikh like Jagmeet Singh condemning colonialism is one of the most hilarious things I've ever heard, because the Sikhs were the hired muscle of the British Empire. And about the media, this is from Oliver Darcy at CNN Business. A reporter at the Washington Post filed a lawsuit Thursday against the newspaper, its former top editor, and other senior leaders, alleging she was subject to unlawful discrimination after publicly saying that she had been the victim of sexual assault. The reporter, Felicia Sonmez, had previously said that she had been prohibited from covering stories about sexual misconduct because she had been outspoken about being a sexual assault survivor herself. As a national politics reporter, the ban had kept her from writing stories about how the Me Too movement had upended politics, such as the allegations against Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh during his confirmation process. The ban was eventually lifted earlier this year, the lawsuit said, after Sonmez criticized the newspaper both privately and public over the policy. It was instituted during the tenure of former executive editor Marty Barron, who retired from the paper in February. But while the Post did lift its ban on her ability to write stories on sexual misconduct issues, Sonmez's lawsuit said that severe damage had already been done. The lawsuit alleged that she'd suffered, quote, economic loss, humiliation, embarrassment, mental and emotional distress, and the deprivation of her rights to equal employment opportunities. At various times, Ms. Sonmez became severely depressed, developed intense anxiety, and received treatment from therapists and psychiatrists, who she continues to see today. Sonmez's lawsuit said, adding that she was also prescribed antidepressant medication that she continues to take. She also experienced physical pain, including severe pain in her jaw from grinding her teeth at night, the lawsuit continued. As a result, she has had to undergo 2 oral surgery procedures to relieve the pain in her jaw. Did someone tell this woman that journalism was all beer and Skittles? It is a very anxious profession if these people are doing their jobs well, and it seems entirely reasonable to me that the Washington Post would bar a woman who had become, how would I put it, a public face of sexual assault from reporting on such issues, because it's reasonable to expect less than impartial treatment from such a woman. And again, you see what happens when you let women into journalism? This is from The Hill. Country singer Morgan Wallen says issues of race stretches across the industry. Yes, he was caught on camera using racist language, but Morgan Wallen says the race issue likely extends across the country music industry. It would seem that way, yeah, the Whiskey Glasses singer told Good Morning America's Michael Strahan in a Friday interview when asked if there's a race problem in country music. I haven't really sat and thought about that, Wallen, 28, said. Wallen apologized in February after TMZ published a video in which Wallen uses a racial slur after a night out in Nashville with a group of friends. In the footage, the performer appeared to tell the companions goodbye by saying to take care of this N-word. Asked to be understood why the slur upsets Black people, Wallen replied, I don't know how to put myself in their shoes because I'm not, but I do understand, especially when I say that I'm using it playfully or whatever, ignorantly. I understand that must sound, like he doesn't understand. Wallen faced fierce backlash after the footage came to light, with country music stars such as Mickey Guyton and Maren Morris criticizing him. His record label also dropped him, and radio stations refused to play his songs. So now he is, beating his breast, and slashing his scalp, so that the blood pours over his face to show his contrition. This is just absolutely disgusting. But you see what's going on here, that country music is for, in the main, white people's music. And it's been decided that is not going to be the case. We already have Lil Nas X, the great country star, who came out as gay last year and then now sings about having sex with the devil. Yes, that's the kind of country music that the elite wants. And this fellow Morgan Wallen is pleased to do his part. And let's talk about the Great Replacement, which is something that definitely isn't happening, which is misinformation and a disgusting white supremacist conspiracy theory, except when people like Dick Durbin say, well, it is happening and it's great. Or going back to the 1990s when Bill Clinton says, it is happening, it's great, white people are going to become a minority, you better get used to it. Yes, by the time that white people become a minority, assuming that happens, Bill Clinton will be dead. So he won't have to worry about it. He's made his pile. This is by Raheem Kassam in the National Pulse. Proof of the left's mass migration political effort was made public 12 years ago in a stunningly similar series of incidents to what is currently taking place on the U.S. southern border. When Kamala Harris scratches her head in Guatemala, farcically discussing the root causes of mass migration, the truth of the matter can be found in a little-known draft government paper from the United Kingdom dating back to 2001. Britain's raging immigration argument had gasoline poured on its fire in late 2009 when a low-level former government advisor penned an op-ed for London's Evening Standard. Therein, Andrew Nether discussed the then Labour government's strategy to flood the UK with migrants based on flawed and false job market claims. Nether wrote of Prime Minister Tony Blair's Performance and Innovation Unit, PIU, a taxpayer-subsidized government think tank. The PIU's reports were legendarily tedious within Whitehall, but their big immigration report was surrounded by an unusual air of both anticipation and secrecy. Drafts were handed out in summer 2000 only with extreme reluctance. There was a paranoia about it reaching the media. Eventually published in January 2001, the innocuously labeled RDS Occasional Paper number 67, Migration and Economic and Social Analysis, focused heavily on the labor market case. But the earlier drafts I saw also included a driving political purpose, that mass immigration was the way that the government was going to make the UK truly multicultural. Now, there was hardly a whistleblower on the matter either. He claimed to have been uncomfortable with the government's plan, but he defended the revelation against those who, at the time and to this day, laid blame for the carnage caused by mass migration at the feet of his bosses. In one short op-ed, he had revealed a political conspiracy to change the demographics of the United Kingdom in such a way that would be described as a far-right conspiracy theory for years, despite being admitted as true. The political motivation was abundantly clear to the public and perhaps paved the way for an eventual 2016 Brexit vote. Nether admitted in 2009, quote, "I remember coming away from some discussions with the clear sense that the policy was intended, even if this wasn't its main purpose, to rub the right's nose in diversity and render their arguments out of date." This is pretty much exactly what Senator Durbin said just a few days ago. That seemed to me to be a maneuver too far. Ministers were very nervous about the whole thing. There was a reluctance elsewhere in government to discuss what increased immigration would mean, above all for Labour's core white working class vote. This shone through even in the published report. These social outcomes it talks about are solely those for immigrants. And this first-term immigration policy got no mention among the platitudes on the subject in Labour's 1997 manifesto, headed Faster, Firmer, Fairer. The results were dramatic. In 1995, 55,000 foreigners were granted the right to settle in the UK. In 2005, that had risen to 179,000. Last year, with immigration falling thanks to the recession, it was 148,000. That was written in 2009. 10 years later, the number was 2.7 million, with a further 2.2 million being handed pre-settled status. Given that Nether believed that just 3% of 2019's 4.9 million settled or pre-settled total was dramatic, it bodes consideration of how such policies currently being enacted by the Biden regime in the United States will spiral. Joe Biden told migrants to surge the U.S. border in one of the most self-destructive and arguably treasonous acts in modern U.S. history. Even the Washington Post declared the situation out of control as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez turned a blind eye to Biden locking kids up in his newly unveiled detention centers. In September 2020, we at the National Pulse crunched the numbers on Joe Biden's migration policy and came out with a number eye-wateringly close to the same influx Britain saw after Tony Blair's attempts to rub the right's nose in diversity. 77 million people could flock to the U.S. under a Biden regime, as an admittedly high estimate. What was a 3,211% increase in Britain over less than a decade would translate to roughly 27 million new people in the United States if the same new migration terms were accepted. And it's already happening. 27 million at a low end and 77 million at the high end would leave the U.S. a totally changed country. Some will no doubt poo-poo these figures. Migration hawks and doves alike settle on predictions that are lower than reality, mostly because it's almost impossible to know for sure, given the types of data the U.S. government successfully keeps, and no one wants to be considered an alarmist. But it's time to ring the alarm, especially when reconsidering Nether's comments, the UK government's position in the early 2000s, and how cohesive British civil society is today not very. Mass migration is a weapon as the political left is concerned. They've already placed that weapon to America's throat, and we have begun to draw blood. Tom Bauer, in his biography of Boris Johnson, notes that Boris Johnson loves immigrants. And he loves illegal immigrants, too. Then he wanted to give them all amnesty in London when he was mayor there for 8 years. The worst riots in a generation broke out in London, went on for several days when Boris was mayor. Bauer neglects to mention that these were black people running amok. Not just the usual burning and looting and smashing, but deliberately stopping, kidnapping, humiliating white people. Gangs of black people would stop white people and force them to take off all their clothes and give them to them, and leave them in their underpants and their socks in the street. A very famous picture. You might have seen it. Bauer, he's not going to mention that because I suppose that he has already had his nose rubbed in diversity. Similarly, I believe it was last year that the Liberal government announced that it believed that too many immigrants who come from the third world, overwhelmingly, mostly family reunification, and so-called refugees, that they go to Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and secondarily to places like Edmonton and Calgary. He wants them out in the hinterlands. Now, why does Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party want these new immigrants in the hinterlands? Because it's in the hinterlands that is the core of support for the Conservative Party of Canada. I saw the entire piece by Nether, and one of the claims that he made, which is obviously quite true, is that Tony Blair's government figured that this newfound diversity would mean that the Conservatives could never win another election. And this is clearly the plan of the Liberal Party, although it was the plan of Brian Mulroney and Stephen Harper as well. Oh, the immigrants are so very entrepreneurial and family values up the yazoo, so they're going to vote for us. Well, the so-called breakthrough year for the Conservative Party, the year 2011, when Stephen Harper won his majority government, they got 31% of visible minority vote. Now, visible minority is not quite the same as immigrant, but, you know, there's a huge overlap. During that same election, Harper got 55% of the Protestant vote. So perhaps you should, graze where the grass is. Perhaps you shouldn't. Yes. The new people, the newcomers are voting more than 2-1 against us. But what we lose on each individual vote will make up in quantity. This is actually how Conservatism Inc. thinks. Yet another reason why it is doomed. Doomed, I tells ya. Let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say today. I can't read most of it because I will be banned by YouTube. But let's see what I can say. His column is called Big Fail. Is it still lying if you're senile? Ethics experts and other viziers of morality might puzzle that out now that something like truth is emerging about redacted and many other folks in other countries for a premature exit from this world. Yeah, again, redacted. Let's see. Did the blunt tip of Joe Biden's regime spear, old white Joe Biden himself, actually lie Wednesday when he told Americans in the world that the COVID vaccines are safe and to stay calm and get vaccinated? The town hall format featuring JB was like one of those old Carnival tent shows where a microcephalic is brought on stage to perform awesome intellectual feats, like counting from 1 to 10, skipping the number 7, to the delectation of the assembled bumpkins with normally sized but perhaps lopsided heads. Joe dazzled the Ohio crowd with a series of impromptu utterances that were not just word salad, but a whole cold buffet of fugitive thoughts. For instance, quote, "And we must be the leader of the free world. If we don't do it, nobody good is likely to do it, has the capacity to do it. I really mean it. I genuinely mean it. So what's the thing, Don? That is the only time. And by the way, the first time I walked downstairs and they played Hail to the Chief, I wondered, where is he?" Unquote. Yes. On the other hand, Dr. Tony Fauci, a.k.a. The Science, did not appear to be senile in his Senate testimony this week, just desperate, since the full story of how his long and rather secretive campaign to heroically develop the vaccine to end all vaccines, which seems to have come to grief, is just busting to come out. And there's much that he says about Fauci and patents, which I can't repeat here. Sorry. Poor Mr. Trump was hustled into the warp speed cover story for these shenanigans, which perhaps explains why he never looked entirely comfortable on stage with Dr. Fauci and the rest of the White House team. Meanwhile, news about the efficacy of the vaccines, and especially any adverse to the reactions to the vaccines, has been very carefully managed by the government, the captive news media, and the, let's just say it, the evil social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and Google's YouTube. And I know I talked about Biden being a stuttering senile buffoon. What was it, yesterday? But I think this is such a big story that it deserves a little more coverage from me. From the Daily Mail, quote, the experts say we know that this virus is, in fact, it's going to be, or excuse me, Biden loses his thoughts on vaccines, flubs answers on his foreign policy work, and falsely tells town hall, you won't get COVID if you have the shot. So, how about some of Joe Biden's greatest hits from the CNN town hall? Response to question about how to prevent misinformation. Quote, these are trusted interlocutors. That's not what interlocutors means, Joe, but never mind. Think of the people. If your kid wanted to find out whether or not there's a man on the moon or whatever, something, or whether those aliens are here or not, who are the people they talk to beyond the kids who love talking about it? They go to people they respect and they say, what do you think? Response to question about Capitol riot conspiracy theorists. This is not who we are. And I'll say one thing, and you're going to. I've had a lot of experience internationally, and I mean that, not good or bad, just I have. I've chaired the Foreign Relations Committee. I've been deeply involved. I did the national security for our last administration with Barack. Response to question on vaccines for children. And the question is whether or not we should be in a position where you why can't the experts say we know that this virus is in fact it's going to be, or excuse me, we know why all the drugs approved are not temporarily approved but by permanently approved. That's underway too. I expect that to occur quickly. Response on question on whether his unemployment benefits stopped people going back to work. I see no evidence that had any serious impact on it, but you can argue, let's assume it did. It's coming to an end, so it's not like we're in a situation where if that was it and it ends, then we're going to see John is going to have a problem. From what I think is happening, folks, is look, if we make less than 50, and I'm not saying, John, your folks make less than 15. You had good restaurants. That means their tips are good. People make a lot more than just what the minimum wage, what the wage is being paid on, with the put tips on top of it. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States of America. I'll admit, and I've admitted from the beginning, that Donald Trump is not fluid in his speech. He tends to speak in sentence fragments, but I don't think very many people would complain that it's difficult to understand his meaning. But the same people in the media, the regime media, who are always laughing at Trump for being inarticulate, have been strangely silent about Joe Biden. This is from Dara Roche at Newsweek. Representative Madison Cawthorn claims President Joe Biden is, quote, mentally unstable, unquote, and said First Lady Joe Biden should be called out for being cruel to her husband. Cawthorn, a Republican who represents North Carolina's 11th congressional district, spoke to Newsmax's Chris Salcedo about his views on the president's mental state and Jill Biden's, that's Dr. Jill Biden to you, treatment of her husband. Salcedo said that Biden has lost control of the pandemic and cited border crossings by unvaccinated individuals. Yeah, they're not going to check, because why would you why would you check? Why would you check? You're going to force everyone to get vaccinated. Apparently, you're going to try to force everyone to wear masks, but you're not going to check whether people just flowing across the border have COVID-19, because, they're two completely different things. He asked Cawthorn if Republicans should hold Biden accountable for putting America in reverse in terms of COVID. Cawthorn said, I would love to have a congressional inquiry to understand exactly what Joe Biden's reasoning is, but unfortunately, I don't think he could find his way to Congress. I'm talking from a very objective standpoint here. I think we should indict Jill Biden. I'm not saying indict in terms of criminal, but I'm saying that we should call her out for being so cruel to her husband. More on that from the Daily Wire. Former White House physician Ronnie Jackson, who served in the role under both Presidents Obama and Trump, told Fox News Thursday night that he believes that President Biden will be forced to resign or will face the 25th Amendment over issues related to his fitness for office. Jackson, who now represents Texas's 13th congressional district, told Fox that he's been saying for a while that something's going on here. Quote, "And I've been saying that it's only going to get worse, and get what? We're watching that happen right before our eyes right now. And I'm at the point right now where, I went from, telling people we should be concerned about what might potentially be going on to now saying, hey, what is happening right now? Where are the people in our academic medicine that were calling out for President Trump to have a cognitive test? Where are these people? There's something seriously going on with this man, that is Biden, right now. And, I think that he's either gonna resign. They're going to convince him to resign from office at some point in the near future for medical issues, or they're going to have to use the 25th Amendment to get rid of this man right now." Well, that would lead to President Kamala Harris, wouldn't it? Now, Kamala Harris is not a popular woman, not even amongst Democrats. She did even worse in the primaries than Joe Biden did. I mean, in the first stage. And she has not made a very good impression. I just, what would happen? It's an interesting question. What would happen if it just became obvious to everyone, for instance, that, Joe is standing at a podium and he thinks he's at a urinal. So he, pulls a zipper down and pulls it out, and does his business. Well, suppose he did that. And then the Democrats are thinking, the Kamala Harris will be wiped out in 2022. Is there some way that they could somehow get around this? I suppose, there's the pillow maneuver. We have this, COVID-19 around, and oh dear, Kamala Harris is in a secure, undisclosed location suffering from the dreaded Delta variant. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe that will happen. And, oh, yes, let's go to the story that was suggested to me earlier in the chat. Update, Lisbon court rules only 0.9% of verified cases died of COVID, numbering 152, not 17,000 as claimed. A federal district court has ordered the National Institutes of Health to release the Moderna safety data from Moderna's COVID vaccine trials that Tony Fauci has been hiding. We will see, Paul Craig Roberts writes, if the corrupt American establishment will have a higher court overturn this ruling. It appears that my reading of the COVID information is correct. America's frontline doctors have filed a federal lawsuit to stop the emergency use of untested and unapproved vaccines on 3 groups of people. We will see if Big Pharma owns the courts too. We've been lied to by medical bureaucrats, and one person I won't name, and Rochelle Walensky at CDC, by the medical establishment, by ignorant politicians, and of course, by the scum prostitutes and social media. One of the doctors involved with the lawsuit stated, "My child will not be the subject of an experiment. What kind of monsters are we allowing to control us? Perfectly healthy children have developed heart inflammation, brain bleeding, and even died. I have had enough. I am not sacrificing my child so a pharmaceutical company can experiment on her. This madness has to stop." Oh, and let's go to Birmingham, England for some restaurant news. Restaurateurs, or, those who fancy themselves chefs, are they all angry people? Because, so many of them, well, certainly the ones I've read about in both England and America, they always seem to be on the verge of, going postal. I know it's a high-stress job and all that, but there are many other high-stress jobs. And just give me a second here. I just have to open another tab that has Twitter in it. Again, for some reason, I can't open Twitter directly from Microsoft Word for reasons that are a mystery to me, but never mind that. From Bridie Pearson-Jones at the Daily Mail, "How can some cotton over your gob offend you so much? Michelin Guide restaurant issues furious rant against customers who don't want to wear masks and tells them you're all effing nuts. Alex Claridge, chief owner of The Wilderness, The Wilderness, a modern British fine dining establishment in Birmingham's upmarket jewelry quarter, said he was flabbergasted by customers who were canceling reservations because they are keeping... Yeah, okay, there's words missing from this sentence. Presumably, it's just they have to wear masks. On Monday, all COVID-related restrictions were lifted in the UK, meaning people could dine in groups of more than 6 nightclubs could reopen, and face masks and social distancing are no longer compulsory. However, with cases still rising, businesses across the country are keeping restrictions in place, and many restaurants are still insisting on face coverings when customers aren't seated at the table. Speaking to Female, Alex, who wrote the tweets, said, "I have to stand for something. Obviously, the problem is there's always someone with a very small penis who takes defensive, but is very much a vocal minority. And guess what? He's a hipster beardo." Yep, with both arms almost completely covered with tattoos. I wonder if he ever worries about the risk, infection from tattooing. It comes after the Wilderness Twitter account shared messages from angry customers canceling their bookings, writing, quote, "To everyone who has emailed us to confirm they are angry that we won't be relaxing all restrictions whilst we monitor the situation, I am flabbergasted. This is clearly an emotive issue, but honestly, you're all effing nuts. Why are you effing mental? I won't ever apologize for putting safety and welfare first. How can some cotton over ya gob," yes, he actually spelled it Y-A, "when going for a piss, offend you so much?" Because it's so stupid. When you sit down at the table, you can take your mask off and the waitress comes right up to you. I mean, your food and drink isn't delivered with some Rube Goldberg machine, from 2 meters away. No, the waitress comes right up to your table. But no, when you walk to the bathroom, got to put the mask on, because that just makes perfect sense. The restaurateur continues, "My tale comes second fiddle to doing what I think is the best course of action to protect my guests and prevent a third lockdown." The Twitter account also shared messages from COVID skeptic customers, with one writing, "Eating out is treat and masks ruin it," adding, "I won't be supporting your restaurant until this stops." Yes, well, what else do we know about this fellow? This is from Birmingham Live from 5 years ago. Acclaimed Birmingham chef in shock Twitter rant. Chef Alex Claridge went on an astonishing Twitter rant after people failed to turn up to one of his events. Angry young man. And Birmingham chef Alex Claridge launched a Twitter tirade at people taking the mick. That means to make fun of. After recent No Rules event unfortunately turned into the No Shows event. Furious Alex revealed over social media how after catering for a certain number of people who had booked beforehand, he was faced with a shocking 16 people who didn't bother to show up. Well, I don't know. I can rather understand that, And let's go to his Twitter feed. The Wilderness. "You lot who don't like masks just discovered Google reviews, I see. Crack on." And he had sort of he rage quit earlier. Maybe he's deleted. Oh, he seems to have deleted those tweets. He seems to have deleted those tweets where he blamed the people objecting to his policy for his meltdown. Yes, I responded to him. "You argue like a woman." But wait, here is Alex Claridge's, and I recognize him by his face and his hipster beardo look. Here's his previous Twitter account, and it says, "Do the food and drink at Nomad Birmingham at No Rules Beham. They only give you 2 choices, be a rebel or a slave. What do? I rebel." Golly, golly, he was such a transgressive person, but no longer. Sad, isn't it? Very, very sad. And from Summit News, Paul Joseph Watson, Conservative MP Andrew Murison asked the UK government's vaccine minister whether authorities ought to consider mandating the standard flu vaccine before allowing young people to enter crowded venues. Yes, really. 22,000 people died from seasonal flu in 2017 to 18. The modeling suggests this year's season will start early, be severe, and will affect young people more than COVID, a demographic that tends to go to mass events, said Murison. So have the government also been considering mandating proof of flu vaccinations? Vaccines minister, yes. England actually has a vaccines minister. Nadhim Sahawi didn't directly answer the question, but said on the subject of flu, the operational plan is to go early September for both COVID boost and the flu campaign. Brits who have already taken 2 shots of the coronavirus are going to be asked to take another booster shot before the winter. Meanwhile, the unvaccinated will be more openly discriminated against as the months roll by, before eventually being forced to live under a state of de facto indefinite lockdown. And, oh yes, I was suspicious of this story when I talked about it, 2 or 3 days ago? And this is from AL.com, AL being Alabama. I'm sorry, but it's too late. Alabama doctor on treating unvaccinated, dying COVID patients. Dr. Brittany, I've seen a lot of different spellings of that unfortunate name, Brittany. This one, Brytney, is not one that I've seen before. But anyway, Dr. Brittany said Monday that all but one of her COVID patients in Alabama did not receive the vaccine. The vaccinated patients, she said, just need a little oxygen and is expected to fully recover. Some of the others are dying. I'm admitting young, healthy people to the hospital with very serious COVID infections, wrote Kobia, a hospitalist at Grandview Medical Center in Birmingham, in an emotional Facebook post Sunday. One of the things they do before they're intubated is beg me for the vaccine. I hold their hand and I tell them that I'm sorry. It's too late. Is that true? Because it sounded pretty horrifying, didn't it? Kind of like those people that didn't get vaccinated were quite foolish. So the story, this is from at Elon Bachman. So this story making the rounds about an Alabama doctor inundated with desperately ill young people. She works in a hospital that has 7 total patients in ICU who have tested positive for COVID. Learn to spot the lie, folks. But wait, there's a correction. Oops, I messed up. The 7 COVID patients are in the entire hospital. There are 0 COVID patients in her hospital's ICU. Scott Fogelman comments, much like the rampant racism claims, rampant COVID claims almost always turn out to be hoaxes or gross exaggerations. Makes one wonder if everything was as bad as we are constantly told, why the need to fabricate so often. Well, people have to be terrified into doing the right thing, apparently. And if you have to bend the truth a little, I suppose, or a lot, or simply, speak porky pies, I guess it's worth it, right? So the dreaded Delta variant is about to cause a terror in Washington, D.C. This is from Emily Gooden at the Daily Mail. Another fully vaccinated congressional staffer has tested positive for COVID. It was revealed Friday as concerns grow about the rising number of breakthrough cases inside the government. The staffer works for Democratic Representative Kai Kahale of Hawaii. Yes, a fully vaccinated member of the congressman's office tested positive, Kahale spokesman Michael Ahn said. We are in coordination with the Office of the Attending Physician, and our office policies follow all recommendations and guidelines from the CDC and OAP. Concern is rising on Capitol Hill after a fully vaccinated staffer in Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office tested positive for COVID. More staff and lawmakers have been wearing face masks because there have been long lines at COVID testing centers in the Capitol. A senior congressional aide told BuzzFeed there is a real sense of unease in a number of offices. Even those with fully vaccinated staff are encouraging work from home and urging folks to consider wearing masks when they're in the office. And, oh, yes, civil servants who don't work, who haven't been working or haven't been showing up at the office for, what, a year and a half now? Why do they still have their jobs? If the, if the Canadian government is still, trundling along and the American government is still trundling along, wouldn't it make sense to fire about half or 3/4 of these people? Here's another data point. This is from Matt Welch at Reason. Americans can't travel because State Department employees won't work. Massive passport processing delays due to COVID restrictions and staffing shortages are ruining summer travel plans and prompting fantastical workarounds. And Welch describes his own fantastical workaround. They were going to see the in-laws in France, and troubles with passports and all of the rest of it. In a July 4th press briefing on the issue, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Passport Services Rachel Arndt insisted that we've been doing and continue to do everything we can to serve the American public while prioritizing the health and safety of our staff and of our customers. Yeah, they're just not going into work. Do you know who is back in the office? Unlike State Department employees who've had access to COVID vaccines longer than most of the rest of us, scores of millions of Americans, including many who would like to visit their relatives for the first time in a year and a half. I don't know. Am I the only one who's talking about this? Once again, if we can go without teachers actually being in the classroom for a year and a half, why do we need teachers? The enormous salaries that they're typically paid, well, especially in my country, if they're not going to bother to show up to work. A lot of money floating around, COVID money, that is. So why not let politicians and bureaucrats get their share? I mean, it's only fair. This is from Michigan Live. Members of the Shiawassee County Board of Commissioners agreed to share a windfall in federal COVID-19 relief funds with employees last week. What they didn't tell the public was that top-level administrators for the county would receive far bigger payments, up to $25,000 each, than frontline workers who were directly exposed to coronavirus as they cleaned buildings and provided vaccines to residents. How is this not fraud and or theft? How? There's a video. It's got swearing in it. It's at the very end. So, when you hear someone shouting, you can turn the video off. Because the substance has been shown. It's at Space Kook with KOOK 2. That's the numeral 2. Fauci's busted. And we have Dr. Fauci talking about, exciting times ahead. The NHS lifts funding pause on gain-of-function research. And there's all these doomsayers. Yeah, they don't know what's going on, these doomsayers. Gain-of-function research is absolutely necessary. And then he goes on. There's a different clip from January 2017, just after Trump had been inaugurated. Oh, yes, all the challenges involved. Also, we know that there's going to be a major unplanned outbreak. You know that? How do you know that? You might recall in the past that, in places like California, Oregon, Washington State, British Columbia, what with the fault lines running through these jurisdictions. I've been hearing this since I was a teenager. The big one's coming soon. It's coming soon. Well, it's more than 50 years since that terror campaign began, and we still haven't seen the big one. I don't know. It could happen in 5 minutes, or, maybe it won't happen for 500 years or ever, because these sort of things cannot be predicted. There's a piece on the Unity News Network. Do these redacted even work? It's the unitynewsnetwork.co.uk, which I commend to you. But I don't know that there's much that I can read about it. So I'm not going to risk my perch here. Let's just move on to Lockdown Skeptics, which is now at a Daily Skeptic. That's skeptic with a C.org. Key workers must still self-isolate when not working. Yes, this is the wonderful pingdemic. Smallest of key workers have been made exempt from self-isolation rules amid reports of food shortages due to the pandemic. Staff in the hospitality and retail sectors have, however, been told that they must still stay at home if they are pinged by the NHS COVID app, despite their industries taking a battering from strict quarantine rules. You could always delete the app. Apparently, many millions of Britons have already done so. Are the vaccines reducing hospitalizations? There follows a guest post by an academic economist on this question. And he talks about the apparent failure of the vaccine rollout to reduce the number of over 60s being admitted to hospital with COVID-19 as a percentage of the number of over 60s testing positive rate. And we have Governor Ron DeSantis stands firm against lockdowns as COVID surges in Florida. UK positive cases plummet 33% in week following Freedom Day. Italians to require COVID green passes to get into restaurants, gyms, and theaters. Lecturers Union calls for full vaccination of all students by September and continuation of mask wearing on campus. Only 1.6% of school children forced to self-isolate for 10 days went on to develop COVID. Domestic holiday industry hit by staff shortages at start of crucial season. Why is this government so wedded to the ruinously expensive and completely useless test and trace program? Darren McGrogan, Associate Professor of Law at Northumbria Law School, writes, with the so-called pingdemic well underway and showing no sign of abating, the question naturally arises, why are our politicians obsessed with finding technological ways out of the pandemic? What possessed them to imagine that test and trace could ever be successful? The proximate cause appears to have been an unholy alliance between Matt Hancock and Dominic Cummings. You've heard of him, the angriest man in England, who looked at what had happened in South Korea and Taiwan and came to the bizarre conclusion that what had apparently worked there in societies and circumstances totally unlike ours could just be transplanted here and deployed as effectively. Whether this should more properly be described as hubris or stupidity is a question I will leave to the reader to decide. The problem, though, has much deeper roots. The Hungarian-French thinker Anthony de Jazet once made the observation, which, like all great observations, is deceptively simple, that there is a natural bias among politicians toward doing things. It takes a very special kind of person to get elected to national office and then resist using the power available to them. In fact, such a person may not exist at all. It is impossible to identify a leader even remotely resembling that type on either side of the Atlantic since perhaps Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s. Why do people decide to become politicians after all? Because they want to do things. Well, going back to England being compared to South Korea and Taiwan, one of the reasons we have these very harmful harm reduction policies vis-a-vis, say, heroin use in my province of British Columbia is that politicians from Vancouver and Victoria went to Copenhagen. Oh, yes, this is what they're doing in Copenhagen. And did they consider for a moment that the personality, the mores of people in Copenhagen and those in Vancouver and Victoria are very different? That people in Denmark like to follow rules and that Anglo-Saxons do not like to follow rules? No, they never gave that a moment's thought, because people are the same everywhere in the world, and anyone who would doubt that, well, is a bigot, quite possibly a white supremacist. This is from Alex Berenson. Wow, wow, wow. University of California says the quiet part out loud, quote, infectious disease experts anticipate that annual or more frequent boosters will be necessary, end quote, and they will be mandated for students, including grad students. Berenson continues, the best way to look at the British data, if the vaccines are even moderately effective, getting another 25% of unvaccinated people under 50 vaccinated, under 1 million people, would do more to cut deaths than vaccinating everyone else. Be honest. Focus on the at risk. That's what they should have been doing from the beginning, but instead, they just panicked. Oh, let's see. David Frum has weighed in on this. Vaccinated America has had enough. In the United States, this pandemic could almost be over by now. The reasons it's still going are pretty clear. You know, considering his role, David Frum's role in the Iraq fiasco, with the hundreds of thousands of lives lost, with the trillions of dollars squandered based on lies, why this man was ever allowed to open his mouth or type anything for money again is a mystery, but the elite protects itself. Berenson comments, more genius thinking from vaccine fanatic David Frum. If the US could just reach Israeli or British vaccination levels, everything would be fine and we'd never have to think about COVID again. Oh, yeah, it hasn't worked out too well in England and in Israel, has it? Berenson continues, the complaining about state-level variations in vaccine levels when the most vaccinated countries are suffering from surges in cases and deaths really is Team Vaxpocalypse thinking at its finest. Oh, Fauci says funding the Wuhan lab was a good and proper scientific decision. Wait a minute, is he was telling Rand Paul the other day that no, the NIH did not fund gain of function research at Wuhan. They were funding something else, which was not gain of function, even though they were making diseases more transmissible to humans, which is my understanding that that is gain of function, but no, Dr. Science says it isn't. Berenson comments, bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Do you know how long all of us have been waiting to study a real-life pandemic? And now we have one. See, the science worked. Trust the science. Bulletin from Dr. Anthony Fauci. Let's go to the chat. Terrace Feral Hog says, will booster shots have side effects? Well, all vaccines have side effects. It's a question of, how many side effects there are and how serious they are. Yorgi Starkov says, the only chance for Hungary is a clear-cut divorce, start a national sovereignty movement, do a long, hard campaign with all the allies they have, and then go for the exit. Well, there's been talk about I forget the specific name for this. Is it Vinegrad? Is that it? No, I've got that wrong. But it's a coalition of countries in Central Europe, Poland, Hungary, and others. Because, this coalition, it would be useful for them to have an, outlet to the sea. Because, it would be clearly the goal of the EU, if it ever turned feral on Hungary, to make it impossible for them to, export anything. And what else do we have at the chat? Yorgi Starkov says the EU is supposed to be a trading and internal movement agreement. Since when does something like that have values? Well, Robert Schuman, not the composer, but considered one of the fathers of European integration, apparently the anti-Pope Francis is keen on canonizing him. And I wonder what Schuman, the late Robert Schuman, would think about an EU which is determined to ruin Hungary because it bans homosexual propaganda for children. Visigard Group. I was close. No, it sounds like a very good idea to me. Berkin Sultanov says EU is generating its own demise because of its own extremism. And Steve says, isolate. Humans must isolate. Enron says, what are the characteristics of arguing like a woman? Exaggeration and attacking people's motives just for disagreeing with them coming to mind. Constantly shifting the goalposts is another one. Or when someone says, you did such and such a thing, or your side did such and such a thing. No, let's talk about you or your side because you've done much, much worse. Or here's another one. Making a false statement and then, wait, that can't be true. But I don't remember. And then some distance or minutes into the argument, wait a minute, I remember what happened now, and it's exactly the opposite of what she says. If you bring that up, always living in the past. Yes, you have to be living in the past. You just don't want to deal with the present, let alone the future, do you? But you brought it up. No, it's pointless. It's absolutely pointless. Yes, and bursting into tears. There's a lot of that in the Boris Johnson biography, which I will be getting to soon. Hello to Neil Atteri. Okay. Hello to Emma Nimpton. The last 5 years has exposed media as the blatant liars and scammers they are. This term MSN seems superannuated and kind of confusing. I like the term regime media. I think that's better. Steve says the virus will sneak up on you while you're walking. Wear one of those eye masks on the back of your head like they do in Tiger Country. Neil Terry says, I appreciate the insanity of the last 5 years for one thing, having exposed just how viciously childish and mentally ill so many people are in a modern society. Oscar Toe says Kamala can have 30% favorability and win the presidency with 95 million votes in 2024. We shall see. We shall see. Let's go to Hilaire Belloc's The Servile State. This is the final chapter, the imposition of the servile state itself. Belloc writes, there had existed from all time in every community, and there was founded upon common sense the legal doctrine that if one citizen was so placed with regard to another by contract, that he must, in the fulfillment of that contract, perform certain services. And if those services accidentally involved damages to a third party, not the actual perpetrator of the damage, but he who designed the particular operation leading to it, was responsible. The point is subtle, but as I say, fundamental. It involved no distinction of status between employer and employed. Citizen A offered Citizen B a sack of wheat down if Citizen B would plow for him a piece of land which might or might not produce more than a sack of wheat. Of course, Citizen A expected it would produce more and was awaiting a surplus value, or he would not have made the contract with Citizen B. But at any rate, Citizen B put his name to the agreement, and as a free man capable of contracting, was correspondingly bound to fulfill it. In fulfilling this contract, the plowshare B is driving, destroys a pipe conveying water by agreement through A's land to C. C suffers damage, and to recover the equivalent of that damage, his action in justice and common sense can only be against A. For B was carrying out a plan and instruction of which A was the author. C is a third party who had nothing to do with such a contract and could not possibly have justice save by his chances of getting it from A, who was the true author of the unintentional loss inflicted, since he designed the course of work. But when the damage is not done to C at all, but to B, who is concerned with a work the risks of which are known and willingly undertaken, it is quite another matter. Citizen A contracts with Citizen B that Citizen B, in consideration of a sack of wheat, shall plow a bit of land. Certain known risks must attach to that operation. Citizen B, if he is a free man, undertakes those risks with his eyes open. For instance, he may sprain his wrist in turning the plow, or one of the horses may kick him while he is having his bread and cheese. If upon such an accident A is compelled to pay damages to B, a difference of status is at once recognized. B undertook to do work which, by all the theory of free contract, was, with its risks and its expense of energy, the equivalent in B's own eyes of a sack of wheat. Yet a law is passed to say that B can have more than that sack of wheat if he is hurt. There is no converse right of A against B. If the employer suffers by such an accident to the employee, he is not allowed to dock that sack of wheat, though it was regarded in the contract as the equivalent to a certain amount of labor to be performed, which as a fact has not been performed. A has no action unless B has been culpably negligent or remiss. In other words, the mere fact that one man is working and the other not is the fundamental consideration on which the law is built. And the law says you are not a free man making free contract with all its consequences. You are a worker and therefore an inferior. You are an employee, and that status gives you a special position which would not be recognized in the other party to the contract. The principle is pushed still further when an employer is made liable for an accident happening to one of his employees at the hands of another employee. A man A gives a sack of wheat to B and D each if they will dig a well for him. All three parties are cognizant of the risks and accept them in the contract. B, holding the rope on which D is lowered, lets it slip. If they were all three men of exactly equal status, obviously D's action would be against B. But they are not of equal status in England today. B and D are employees and are therefore in a special and inferior position before the law compared with their employer A. D's action is, by this novel principle, no longer against A, who accidentally injured him by a personal act, however involuntary, for which a free man would be responsible, but against A, who was innocent of the whole business. Now, in all this, it is quite clear that A has peculiar duties, not because he is a citizen, but because he is something more, an employer. And B and D have special claims on A, not because they are citizens, but because they are something less, viz. Employees. They can claim protection from A as inferiors of a superior in a state, admitting such distinctions and patronages. It will occur at once to the reader that in our existing social state, the employee will be very grateful for such legislation. One workman cannot recover from another simply because the other will have no goods out of which to pay damages. Let the burden, therefore, fall upon the rich man. Excellent. But that is not the point. To argue thus is to say that servile legislation is necessary if we are to solve the problems raised by capitalism. It remains servile legislation nonetheless. It is legislation that would not exist in a society where property was well divided and where a citizen could normally pay damages for the harm he had himself caused. I should mention in this regard that it has now become routine for companies to have to pay damages to employees, not because management sexually harassed them or made inappropriate comments, but because another employee did. And this is held to be the fault of the company, presumably because all of the employees of that company were not terrorized endlessly with so-called education about sexual or racial harassment. And of course, there's no way out of this bind, because sexual harassment and racial harassment is always going to occur in the workplace. And so the argument can be made, well, there simply wasn't enough education going on. And so that will become the purpose of the company, simply to lecture employees on sexual and racial harassment. That seems to be what's happening, for instance, in the United States military, to give one example. And let's move on to the book club. And the book I'm talking about today is called Boris Johnson, the Gambler, and it came out last year, and it was written by Tom Bauer. I'm going to read from Wikipedia. He was born in 1946, a British writer known for his investigative journalism and unauthorized biographies. These include biographies of Robert Maxwell, of which I have read one, Mohammed Al-Fayed, which I've read, Conrad Black, which I haven't read yet, Richard Branson, Jeremy Corbyn, and Boris Johnson. A book about Richard Desmond remains unpublished. And he's also written about soccer, or what they call football. Bauer is a very entertaining writer. The cliche, but correct in this case, that his books are page turners. Well, I don't know. I think it would be difficult to write a dull book about Robert Maxwell, Muhammad Al-Fayed, or Conrad Black, or Boris Johnson. Actually, Bauer, he proved in his biography that it wasn't Muhammad Al-Fayed, just Mohammed Fayed, because there was nothing aristocratic at all. He just invented it. A lot of people are afraid of Tom Bauer, and I suppose justifiably so. There's a portion in his book about Conrad Black relating to Barbara Amiel and her relations with Peter Brimlow, which is hilarious but rather devastating with regards to Barbara Amiel. Let me just open the book here. Bauer had the great advantage in writing this book in that he got the cooperation of Boris Johnson's mother. And she has a serious problem with Boris Johnson's father. Of course, I should point out that Boris Johnson, his name isn't Boris Johnson. His name is Alexander, which is an excellent name. And to this day, his friends, family call him Al. But no, he chose Boris because it would make him more exotic. His full name is Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson. And he has a complicated background. Well, he was born in New York City, for a start. His father was a student at Columbia at the time, later became an MEP, and became a bureaucrat for the World Bank and the European Commission. More to the point, Stanley Johnson seems a very nasty man indeed. A serial philanderer who abandoned his family with an enormous amount of bitterness resulting to this day. Bauer describes the living conditions that the Johnson family was forced to endure while Stanley was the father, and they just seem rather unbelievable. Just these bureaucrats, they do pretty well, right? Well, Stanley must have been spending the money on something else. Boris is, as mentioned previously, is a champion of diversity and multiculturalism. Well, let's see. He has a Muslim background, not that far away, and Jewish background. His mother is half Jewish. Boris Johnson's first wife was half Jewish, and his second wife is half Sikh. Boris's family can be traced to Turkey during the Ottoman Empire, and Boris is quite cognizant of this, and he is quite proud of it. And it seems that Boris's worldview, if you will, well, it is definitely not Christian, even though he was recently married at no less than Westminster Cathedral to his third wife. Boris, Bauer explains, likes to think of himself as an Oriental Pasha. That women, yes, of course, women come to him, and it is in his fee to have women, because he's an Oriental Pasha. It seems to work with his marriages that he becomes sexually bored with his wives, and then moves on. Bauer explains in considerable detail that Boris, for all his bonhomie, is a depressive person who frequently gets into funks. Of course, Winston Churchill, who is Boris's great hero, was frequently depressed. The black dog, he called it. But of course, no one talks about Winston Churchill's mental health problems, and he probably would have attacked anyone who had characterized it in that way. These are problems with life. Boris was a precocious child and declared at the age of, 3 or 4, that he wanted to be world king. Well, he is not world king, but he is the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Boris has always had, despite his depression, a very high opinion of himself and a belief in his destiny, no less. Noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed as well, that a great many people who become President of the United States or Prime Minister of Canada or Prime Minister of Britain or President of France or whatever country, they declare their desire to become, king or whatever the equivalent is at a very early age. I think these people are dangerous. I really do. I really think these people are dangerous because they have not had the time. They do not have the knowledge or the insight to determine whether they would be good at this or whether it would be in the best interests of their nation for them to rise up the greasy pole. Let's see. Stanley, the father, Bauer writes, the star, after 20 days in the jungle of the 2017 series of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, could not understand how his son had become prime minister. Earlier in 2019, he said that Boris, despite a masterly understanding from Pericles about risk and power, was not personally ambitious and never took risks. Looking across at his son during the dinner, Stanley imagined that in life everything happened spontaneously without much forethought. In his self-centered approach to life, Stanley misinterpreted much about the world, not least what his son had learned from his father's mistakes. I'm impressed by this book, well, I suppose because it confirms something that I have long known, which is that just as important, or perhaps more important in politics, your worth is the worthlessness of your opponents. Boris Johnson could never have become prime minister if Jeremy Corbyn had not been leader of the Labour Party. Boris Johnson was pretty much at the end of his tether because the rebels in his own party had given the Labour Party a majority in Parliament and the so-called Supreme Court of Great Britain, which is just an unconstitutional excrescence, and why hasn't Boris Johnson got rid of it yet, had determined, overruled the Queen in the matter of his prorogation of Parliament. They overruled the Queen. But Jeremy Corbyn, Boris spoke to him and said, hey, we have about like 50-50 chance of winning this election, and things seem to be bollocksed up here, so how about you vote for a snap election? And Jeremy Corbyn did, and his party suffered the worst result in how many decades? It's just a shocking error, but that's the sort of fellow that Jeremy Corbyn is. If you read Bauer's book, it's just, what could you call it? The gambler. How about reckless ambition or reckless disregard? Now, a great many people, most of the pundits in England were just gobsmacked when he became prime minister, because they had been saying for years, they had been saying for, I don't know, the day before or the day of, when the election was announced or when the election was held, that Boris Johnson could never become prime minister. Why? Well, to use the vernacular, and I will apologize, because he is a shit and everyone knows it. He is caddish with women. The amount of pain that he has caused various women and his own children as a result, pretty impressive, I suppose you could say, in terms of a world leader. He has no sense of honor. He was a member at Oxford of the Bollinger Club, whatever it's called. This is where, the toffs, mostly from Eton, again, as I mentioned the other day, as if they're imitating Decline and Fall, Evelyn Waugh's novel. They put on their, dinner dress, and they have a slap-up meal and far too much alcohol, and then they start wrecking things at Oxford. But this is supposedly a gentleman's club, and part of the contract is, it's an implicit contract, that the damages are totaled the next day, and the members of the club, they pony up their share. Well, Bauer notes that given that Boris couldn't even be made to pay for drinks, that is to say his own drinks, they knew better than to ask him for his share of the damage caused by the Bollinger Club. Like David Cameron, Boris Johnson went to Eton. And in many ways, his years at Eton were the greatest of his life. Because, of course, when a man is of that age, then the whole world is in front of him. The older one gets, the more one realizes that having taken this path, you can't take that path, etc., etc. And, of course, many people are disappointed by glory, which has been won, because it's not what they thought that it would be. But of course, when you're a schoolboy, you don't know any of that yet. And Boris has made it clear, just to a ridiculous extent in his competition with David Cameron, that Boris was a scholar at Eton. He was a classic scholar at Eton, and David Cameron was not. Boris was elected to POP, which is the exclusive society at Eton, and David Cameron was not. And then later at Oxford, Boris studied classics. David Cameron did not. David Cameron studied PPE. Of course, David Cameron got a first, and Boris Johnson didn't, which is something that rankles him to this day. There's an old saying, and I suppose the grading system has been changed, but the old saying back in Evelyn Waugh's day was, you get a first or you get a fourth. That is to say, if you get a second or a third class degree, then a lot of people are going to assume that you're stupid because, apparently you studied as hard as you could and you couldn't get a first. So I guess you just didn't have it up here. But I suppose Boris Johnson's, his tremendous success in life is based on the fact that he is a toff. No question about it. But in many ways, he doesn't seem like one. For instance, his appearance. When Johnson was hospitalized for COVID last year and apparently almost died, that is Bauer's opinion, because of his refusal to be treated for various reasons, his refusal to be hospitalized. Also, the fact that he weighs 238 pounds. That is to say, Boris Johnson is himself proof of what we know about COVID-19. That, if you are under the age of 65 or 70, it's really not much of a problem unless you have comorbidities, the most serious of which is morbid obesity. And Boris Johnson is morbidly obese. But, a man as rich as he is, he's nowhere near as rich as he would like to be, and maintaining several houses and privately educating, 6 children or maybe more, We don't know how many children Boris Johnson has because he won't tell us. Boris Johnson made a lot of money in journalism and in other ways. But he's not as rich as many of his Eton or Oxford contemporaries or people that he met in politics. He doesn't dress as if he is rich. His clothes he's always spilling out of them. They don't fit because they're not tailored for his morbid obesity. They're frequently sweat stained because he bicycles while in London. They're frequently food stained as well. Mismatched socks, highly scuffed shoes with holes in the sole. Some people would say that this is an act. Bauer makes it clear this is not an act. That Boris Johnson is simply one of the world's greatest slobs. He recounts shortly before he became prime minister that people, not just journalists, but people were shocked when there was a photograph of Johnson's car, and it was parked illegally for a start, and just the squalor inside the car, just papers everywhere, food wrappers everywhere, unfinished food everywhere, clothing everywhere, masses of crumbs all over the place, all this sort of, the sort of things, like glasses and various bits of tat, this and that, just covering all of the surfaces. So no, he really is a genuine slob. And a lot of politicians claim to have the common touch. Boris actually does have the common touch. He does silly things all the time. He says stupid things all the time, which seems to endear him to the lower orders, because they think, I do silly things all the time, and I do stupid things all the time. And I think more than anything else, and this is why so many people are popular, is because they genuinely seem to be enjoying life. Now, Boris does suffer from the black dog that Churchill did, but he keeps it to himself. Theresa May, we read lots in this books about Theresa May constantly bursting into tears. I do not want the prime minister of my country bursting into tears, whether this person be a woman or a man, because it suggests emotional unfitness. Apparently, Boris is known to sob, but he does it in private, which is where everyone should do it. There's a lot in this book about women crying, particularly Labour and some Conservative MPs. And how on earth do they think that they're going to be respected if they're constantly bursting into tears? Or worse, if they believe that they have burst into tears should not only result in sympathy, but what in political support. Oh, yes, I'm supporting you because you're the kind of person who's not afraid to burst into tears. Well, of course, this is, bursting into tears can be seen as a prime example of female manipulation or bullying, actually. But Boris is always a hail fellow, well met, with the public. He's put up with an enormous amount of abuse over the years. The fact that most of it is true doesn't make any difference, because people don't like being abused. They simply don't. And I think the fact that it's true probably, makes it worse. If someone makes up some outrageous lie about you, well, then you could say, well, no, come on, I'm not going to take that seriously because it's untrue. But if someone points out, disastrous decisions that you've made, or a series of lies that you've told, or how badly that you have treated other people, well, that stings. You know, Boris loves diversity, as I mentioned earlier. He thinks that immigrants are great. Illegal immigrants, legal immigrants, doesn't matter. Why? Because they pay taxes. Oh, yeah, okay. What about those that don't work? What about those who are living in houses that cost thousands of pounds every month? With enormous families. They came from the EU because they could, and they came to Britain for the dole and the luxury, the mansions that they'd be put in. What about the costs, the other costs? What about the policing costs? What about the judicial costs? What about the prison costs? What about the costs for all manner of counselors and therapists and the like? What about the dole costs? What about the costs that can't be costed? That is to say, the destruction of community, of society. Boris doesn't worry about things like that. Boris likes to think of himself as a big picture man, but he's not a big picture man. When he was mayor of London for 8 years, he had previously taken a stand, agreed with Prince Charles that tower blocks were excrescences. When he became mayor of London, no, growth, 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 growth. And all these people are coming to London. Well, maybe you should stop all these people coming to London. But no, places need to be built. So we need tower blocks, 30, 40, 50, 60 story tower blocks, with the result that much of London has been blighted by these tower blocks. And famous views like that of St. Paul's Cathedral are gone for so many Londoners. And the fact that these tower blocks tend to bring about, kind of Clockwork Orange situations in so many cases. No, raising the GDP, that's what it's about. And anyone who would disagree is a Marxist, a scruffy socialist. And the fact that so many of these tower blocks that were constructed when he was mayor, that the money came from outside the country. And so these so-called affordable tower block housing, all Chinese people, say, living in them, or all rich Russians living in them. And of course, when you're talking about living in London now, the word affordable is a rather elastic term. Now, Boris is very good with a quip. I have to say, it would be difficult for me to think of in my lifetime a man who is so good at speaking off the cuff. Now, of course, Bauer makes it clear that this is entertaining, but it often indicates that Boris he doesn't have command of his brief. Now, he's prime minister now, of course, and one doesn't want a prime minister to be micromanaging. But let's look at the discussion of COVID at the end of the book. That Bauer is really quite sound on the question of COVID-19 and the disasters of lockdown. But Boris decided that, PHE, Public Health England, and SAGE, which is the group of boffins, scientific boffins, that advise the government, got to listen to them. Got to listen to them. And PHE and SAGE have been largely responsible for the absolute disaster, the worst own goal in England's history. And Bauer knows all about Professor Neil Ferguson and how he is a fabulist, an absolute fabulist. And he tells the story, which I've mentioned many times in this live stream, about his modeling, about Neil Ferguson's modeling and how it had been proved again and again to be outrageously wrong. And, as I said previously, how difficult would it have been for Boris Johnson or Dominic Cummings, for that reason, to say, yeah, we're getting this stuff from this Professor Ferguson. One of you political people there, just go on the computer there and just look this fellow up. Has he made predictions in the past? And if he has, how did they work out? And for some reason, that did not happen. No, these are the scientists, and so they must be listened to. Boris knew the truth. Boris Johnson knew the truth about COVID right from the very beginning. When he found out that the average age of death for what was 85 for one sex and 81 for the other, and he said this is above average longevity. So apparently, people with COVID are living longer. He was very strongly against the lockdowns, quite rightly so, but he was terrified into this. Oh my God, people are saying that you're a killer, you're a killer, you're a killer. This is the sort of thing that he'd faced these kinds of complaints before, but he just, as they say in England, he lost his bottle. That he did everything that he didn't want to do. And did it work? No, it didn't work. It didn't work at all. And I suppose one of the worst things about Boris Johnson, apart from all the personal stuff, is he doesn't have any fixed political opinions. Bauer gives probably dozens of examples in the book of him turning on a dime, or in terms of how to get out of how to realize Brexit, how to get Great Britain out of the European Union. He seemed to be changing his opinion on how to do this, or what should be done and what shouldn't be done, on a daily basis, or sometimes several times during the day. That Boris, the policy of Boris is Boris, really. Now, I have to say in Johnson's defense that when you look at the accomplishment of getting Britain out of the European Union against almost impossible odds, given the rebellion, given that the Remainers decided that they weren't going to honor the referendum vote, and that the traitors in the Conservative Party were determined to stymie him, and they had, the Remainers had the Supreme Court on their side. It's really amazing that he pulled it off, and I can't help but be impressed. Even though, if you've heard me previously, I have never been an admirer of Boris Johnson for all sorts of reasons. But, when you have an accomplishment as big as his Brexit accomplishment, I guess he's going to go down in history for this. He will be remembered. As for the fiascos, well, Churchill, it gets mentioned a lot. Johnson wrote a biography of Churchill and made a lot of money from it. Churchill liked to micromanage with disastrous results. One would have thought that the disaster at Gallipoli would have finished his political career, but no, it didn't. And then one would have thought that the Churchill's disaster, his disastrous overseeing of the invasion of Norway, would have ended his political career. But instead, Chamberlain was out and he became prime minister. It's funny how politics works. I recommend this book very highly indeed. And again, a lot of political biographies are, stuffy, and they encourage you to spend a lot of pages going over something that happened some years ago that people forgot within a week. A lot of journalists tend to be terrible at writing political biographies because, I wrote on this story, so I have the advantage of all the previous research that I'd done, so I'm going to have to cram this in to my biography. Well, most journalists suffer from what I call journalist disease, which is that people care about the minutiae of life, or particularly politics, as much as reporters or politicians do, and they are very wrong about that. And Tom Bauer does not suffer from that disease. So let's have a final look at, I'll tell you what's coming up next week. I fouled up the book club this week in that for some reason I thought we were going with Boris Johnson, and we should have been going with Suite Française by Irène Nemirovsky, which we will talk about next week. The week after that, I'm going to be talking about Lafcadio Hearn's his works explaining Japan to Westerners. This was an excellent suggestion by one of my correspondents, or perhaps in the chat. Another book about Britain, or England specifically. After that, A State of Fear by Laura Dodsworth, and then Romancing Opiates by Theodore Dalrymple. I'm going to be talking about Richard Strauss on Monday on the book club, and then on August 2nd, Don't Trust Any Rockers Over 30. On August 9th, Anton Bruckner, The Genius as Peasant. And on August 16th, Brian Eno, From Goof to Guru. Coming up on Theater Thursday, I'm going to be talking about Andrzej Wajda's Canal from 1957. On August the 5th, David Robert Mitchell's Under the Silver Lake. On August the 12th, The Archers of the Red Shoes from 1948. And August 19th, from 1952, Vittorio De Sica's Umberto D. So let's have a final look at the chat before I sign off for the week. Okay. Churchill was a journalist in the Boer War. Yes, that's true. Churchill was a journalist. Of course, Churchill also was shot at, which is, a useful experience to have. This has been pointed out, with Boris comparing himself to Churchill, that Churchill actually exposed himself to risk of death. Oh, Jim Smith says, as in Eno is God. Well, having followed Brian Eno's career right from the very beginning, back to the time, when stories were being written about him, recording earthworms, for instance, his transmogrification into the wisest man in Britain comes as something of a shock to me. Chogokin666 says, Klaus Nomi versus Brian Eno, great hairline battle. Well, I guess Brian Eno gave up on pretending to have useful hair quite some time ago. Neil Terry says, back at my pre-COVID job where I could slack off and listen to KMG mostly in peace. Well, thank you for your compliment. I appreciate it. We have a lot of redacted comments here. The loss of Singapore should have ended Churchill's career, says Yo Mama. Chogokin666, was he at Gallipoli, as Peter Weir would say? Well, he planned the Dardanelles disaster, despite being warned vehemently that this would come to grief. And his hair, his hair is silly on anyone. Yes, it is. I wonder how many people have sent him, combs or cheap brushes from Boots. I mean, this is very deliberate. It's part of his cheeky chappy act. Also, I'm just a widow boy. And you can't get, how angry can anyone get with a widow boy? We should all aspire to Putin levels of impassivity, says Hauper. As a general principle, yes. Steve says, Putin does not cry. Putin is the one who makes people cry. Birkin Sultanov says his Turkish ancestor was pretty handsome. That is to say, Boris Johnson. Okay, so Jim Smith is saying that Boris Johnson is not morbidly obese. I would reckon that well, I suppose he's only what, 60, 70 pounds overweight. I mean, considering all the bicycling he's doing, I mean, it's pretty clear that he never stops eating. Okay, the Bullingdon Club was also seen in Brideshead Revisited. Yes, indeed. This critique is too catty, says Birkin Sultanov. Was it Paul Dacre, who was the longtime editor of the Daily Mail, when Boris was selected leader of the Conservative Party, or he went on this rant about family values and conservatism, and I thought, you must be joking. You must be you're the editor of the Daily Mail, and you believe that there is such a thing as family values in politics, when your conservative ministers and MPs are constantly being found knocking up their secretaries or being caught cottaging in Clapham Common or whatever. Family values indeed. But no, to Boris Johnson's credit, I mean, in both senses of the word, he never claimed to be a family values politician, and he never claimed to be a conservative in the small c sense. Certainly a Tory, no question about that. But no, I mean, there's been little hypocrisy in Boris Johnson's wife, at least publicly. Privately, of course, is another matter. Enron says there is, or at least was, a mildly amusing documentary on Boris and David Cameron at Oxford and Eton on YouTube. James Delingpole is in it. The actors playing Boris and Cameron ham it up pretty well. So, again, that's it for the week. I will be back on Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which I would very much appreciate, particularly at this rather grave period, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.